Hey everyone, it's John Kraska, EveryLibrary, the EveryLibrary Institute, EveryLibrary Live tonight. We're doing some wonderful things with indie authors, independent authors who are out there making their way. And we were thinking about, that whole conversation around the culture of reading, the whole conversation about the joy of writing that we try and have beyond the political action committee side of what we do at EveryLibrary, where there's a lot of crises, there's a lot of book bans, there's a lot of censorship, all the other issues. Who's the ultimate indie author? It's the indie author of the year. We are really thrilled to be able to have a conversation tonight with the 2025 Indie Author of the Year, which is an honor presented by the Indie Author Project. It's a partnership that Lyrasis has with a whole bunch of different libraries around the country. I've been a fan of the Indie Author Project for years. I used to dabble in helping them think through, before Lyrasis had it, think through the impact of this project on the publishing ecosystem, on libraries. And it's a real joy to be able to get back in touch with it through Lyrasis. The Indie Author Project is groundbreaking. It's designed to help independent authors reach readers through libraries, and not by chasing the algorithm or other gatekeepers, or it's about by building relationships between authors and librarians and readers to build community. The curated collections that the Indie Author Project puts together are selected by librarians, and that makes them discoverable in library systems nationwide and around the world. In other words, it treats independent publishing as a first-class type of publishing. And I think that's really important. I love the Big Five. They're great fun. We work with a lot of different independent publishers and a lot of different solo creators. In this particular project, though, with the library as the relationship builder and the connector, it's a real thrill to be able to bring you together tonight with Cynthia Swanson, the 2025 Indie Author of the Year. Hi, Cynthia. Nice to see you tonight.
Hi, John. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's a real treat. Absolutely. Cynthia, you are a New York Times bestselling and USA Today bestselling author. You're a winner of the Colorado Book Award, the WILLA Literary Award, and now this national recognition from the Indie Author Project. Your latest novel, Anyone But Her, is a haunting, beautifully layered psychological suspense story that explores grief, inherited secrets, motherhood, disability, and the terrible question of the beauty, what if? This is really great. I want to hang out with you, talk about the book. I want to talk about your journey behind it to be an independent author like this, but still being on the bestsellers. You have an unusual biography, and it's one that I know that everybody who's watching us here on EveryLibrary Live is going to be interested in. So first off, congratulations. What's it like? The 2025 Indie Author of the Year by the Indie Author Project. It's very much a library project. I mean, did you have to bribe anybody in the library space?
I did not. And the finalists for the Indie Author of the Year are the authors who won the Indie Author Project the year before for their books. So there's a fairly small, I think maybe a dozen categories that they have, but they let you know ahead of time that you're in the running for it. And they do ask for some comments about what it would mean to win it. So I did, I had to send them some thoughts that I had about that. And for me, as you said, because my background is a little bit unusual in that I was traditionally published by the Big Five twice before going indie. So it's kind of a different direction than a lot of people expect things to go. And so for me, it means a lot to see that validation, and for my work, for taking that leap of faith, for going indie and saying, okay, I made the right decision because this is being recognized. So it's really a huge honor.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, you do bridge traditional publishing, indie publishing, and also that engagement with libraries and readers like that. There's a very changing ecosystem for publishing these days. I mean, did you look at the changes in your own career and say, let's go this way? Or what pulled you out into the indie space?
It was a combination of a lot of things. It was the Anyone But Her was a book that had been with two different agents, had been on sub in very, very different versions, and was not getting the traction that I wanted for a variety of reasons. And this happens in the Big Five all the time. I was orphaned. So I didn't have a publisher anymore. And I didn't have a contract for a subsequent book with either my Big Five publishers. So I was able to have some freedom to go out and decide what I wanted to do. And it got to the point where I just really trusted my gut about this book and felt like it was the book that I wanted to have out there in the world. We were at the point where my agent said, I can start going to smaller presses. And as you said, the small independent presses are fantastic, but I just didn't feel like it was the direction that I personally wanted to go. So I really started thinking about going indie for the book and decided that's what I wanted to do and the direction I wanted to take it. It was a big change for me, but it ended up working out really well for this particular book.
No, absolutely. I mean, that kind of recognition of being the indie author of the year through that. And then was Lyricist, if you can describe a little bit about the experience, is it an open call for submissions? Is there a pathway to publishing? Like, how does it all work if somebody is sitting there thinking, I should do this myself?
Do you mean as far as Lyricist, as far as entering the contest?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So the Indie Author Contest, I actually came across it through the Authors Guild, which I'm a member of. And there are some wonderful library advocates in that group. And one of them said, you know what, if you're indie pub, you should look into this contest. They run it every year. And she posted a link to it. And this was when it was about 3 or 4 months before Anyone But Her was published. So it was like May 2024. And they accepted submissions of books that were not yet published, but were going to be published that year. So I submitted it, and it's free to enter. And they have, like I said, I think about a dozen categories, 10 or 12. So I thought, well, why not? You know, why not get it out there? And it's funny because then the book was published in September. It was doing really well. It was doing a lot of library events and bookstore events and getting a lot of traction from readers. And about like mid-October, I was like, I wonder whatever happened with that indie author project contest. I never, you know, and then out of the blue, I got an email that I'd won it in the mystery thriller category. So that was really lovely. And that was, so that was like, you know, October 2024, about a month after the book came out. And then it's just, they've been really, really supportive. They're just a wonderful organization. So especially when you, I think one of those things is that, again, it goes back to that validation. I mean, there are just, as you mentioned, so many books published now from so many different venues, from the big presses to the indie presses to people that are indie pubbing their own books. It's like, you know, I think the statistic I've heard is something like 7,000 a day or something crazy like that in the US. It's a lot. So I think as an indie author, it's a way to distinguish yourself. And it's wonderful that the Indie Author Project provides that opportunity for authors to distinguish their work and kind of help it rise a little bit above the many, many, many thousands of books that are published every year.
Yeah. And Lyricist, I think, with their Palace project, has a really democratizing sort of ebook platform as well.
Right.
Not sort of an ebook platform, a democratizing sort of ebook platform. It's available for free. It's as a platform for libraries. Folks can pick up your book and a lot of other books, both traditionally published as well as part of the project on that. It's a real asset, I think, to our sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's authors who would say, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want my book available for free. But that's the point, is it's getting your book out there. And for a lot of authors, especially if you're indie pubbed, it's not a choice of, I'm going to get the library to buy a copy of my book or I'm going to have it for free. It's like if they don't know about it, they're not going to buy it anyway. So, you know, it's a way to get your book out there, especially when you're first getting started, and build that recognition and build that traction, and also just give back to the community.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your book, because it delighted readers, obviously, it delighted librarians. Anyone But Her. Anyone But Her is built on this. I mean, we all ask the question at different points, Cynthia, about what if? What if I had? What if I hadn't?
Right.
And this book is really a haunting story about what if. Can you take readers through it?
Yeah, sure. So Anyone But Her is a dual timeline story. It's psychological suspense. It's set in 1979 and 2004, and it is all told through the viewpoint of the main character, Suzanne. In 1979, she's 14 years old, and her mother, Alex, is shot and killed during an armed robbery at Alex's record store on Colfax Avenue in Denver. And you know this right from the beginning, so I'm not giving anything away. But Alex appears to Suzanne as a ghost and wants Suzanne to investigate what happened during her killing, because Alex believes there's something that's a little bit off with the whole situation. Suzanne's clairvoyant, so she's expecting her mother to show up, and she does, but she does not expect her to be investigating what's going on. And then in 2004, it's 25 years later. Suzanne has lived away from Denver for a long time, but comes back because her husband gets a job there. And there's a lot of repercussions of what had happened back in the 1979 timeline. And so that the stories interweave of the two stories of what's going on between those two timelines in her life. So yeah, it goes back to sort of that mother, that what if question. And this one, like, what if your mother's death was like, ruled an open shut case? It was ruled reckless manslaughter, but then is that really what's happening? What's going on? Mm-hmm. So, so that's kind of the questions that get raised a little bit.
I think the story really moves very quickly, or it has a lot of propulsion behind it, but it's also a very intimate story because you are exploring grief as a theme. Mm-hmm. You're using suspense in a very, I think, appropriate way across those two timelines: motherhood, disability, and the idea of an inherited secret. And the vision that Suzanne has is not a common gift either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because, as I said, I worked on this book for a long time, and I did a lot of rewrites of it. And there were various versions of it that were out there in the world before this one. And it really wasn't until the final version of it that I independently published that Suzanne was clairvoyant. And the reason that happened is because when I made the decision to go indie, one of the first things I did was I went back to my developmental editor who I worked with on the Bookseller, my first book. And I said, I'm thinking of indie publishing this book, but I really need to know, like, is this publishable? And so I really wanted so I hired her to read it at a high level and tell me, and she loved it. And she said, I really like a lot about this, but I cannot get a handle on that ghost. Like, is she a ghost? Is she not a ghost? What's going on there with Alex? And I realized that in all those other versions, I'd been kind of wishy-washy about that. Like, I hadn't really committed to that.
So maybe she was just thinking about it rather
than...
Yeah,
exactly. And so that's when I was like, all right, I either need to yank the ghost thing out, or I need to make, I really need to lean in. Mm-hmm. So I did, and I made Suzanne clairvoyant, and I learned a lot about clairvoyance. And I actually had a couple friends of mine who are clairvoyants read a draft of the book and give me some really wonderful feedback on the accuracy of how I was portraying her. So just kind of that, thinking about what she would know, what she wouldn't know, what she could control, and what she was learning. That was fascinating for me to learn. And I do think it made the book so much stronger in that final version.
Well, there is an interesting conversation to be had about knowledge. Knowledge is both, foreknowledge is protective, but foreknowledge is also very threatening, potentially.
Right. Yeah.
And to have some version of true sight, man, how do you keep moving forward as an individual?
Right. And I mean, one of the things Suzanne says at some point, at a certain point in the book, she says, once you know, that's like the seed of knowledge is that, like, once you know something, you can't unknow it, and you have to figure out what to do with that knowledge. And as a clairvoyant, sometimes you know things that maybe you don't want to know, but then there are things that you do want to know that you don't know. And she kind of wrestles with that dilemma of those two things in her life. She's seeking knowledge that, like, is not coming to her as easily as she wanted it to. And then there are other things that are coming that surprise her. It's probably surprise the reader.
Well, also a 14-year-old Suzanne is very different than a Suzanne who's 25 years older. My math just failed me.
39, she turns 40.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. Well, but the childlike, the child vulnerability and the adult, not to say Suzanne's character is jaded, but to suggest that Suzanne's character is aware, and there's a different kind of awareness at 39 than it is at 14.
Absolutely, yeah. She's a very different person, and one of the things that happens to her through all this, which I think I can say without giving it away, because the book alternates between the two timelines, and I think you probably pick this up pretty quickly in those 2004 chapters, is she doesn't trust her gut in the way that she did when she was 14. And I think that can happen to us based on the things we go through. When we're younger, we just sort of have that idea of, like, I got this, and then things happen and experiences happen, and you wonder, like, wait, do I? And so she really, after the experiences that she went through at 14, she, for a long time, just tried to actually pretend she wasn't clairvoyant. She never even told her husband she was clairvoyant. She just sort of, like, tried to put that all aside consciously and just say, that's just not part of my life that I want to be part of my life anymore. But she found that it's not that easy to just let it go, particularly when you come back to your hometown and there's all these ghosts of the past that are coming up for you in so many ways.
Absolutely. And then her own motherhood and her own family situation. I don't want to give too much away on that as well. But when you talk about knowledge and what's my child going to be like,
Right.
that is there certainly is that motherhood resonance in here for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Suzanne is the 2004 Suzanne at 39, 40 years old is the parent of two children, a teenage daughter and a 9-year-old son. And her son has unspecified cognitive disabilities. They can't quite get a diagnosis on him. They do not, he doesn't meet the criteria for autism at the time. And they just don't quite know what else is going on with him, but he's clearly struggling. And so she goes on yet another investigative journey, kind of parallel to the one that she did in her younger years, because she wants to find out this knowledge, and she thinks there might be some knowledge in Denver and some clues in her own family heritage, in this case on her father's side, that might lead to a diagnosis for her son. So, and those pieces kind of pull together. And again, that comes back to then you learn things that you are surprised that you didn't already know, and also that maybe you didn't want to know until you find them out.
No, I think it wasn't a subplot. It certainly is a through line. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, if I can, we're just meeting tonight, but I got to be honest with you. Denver, through your eyes, is a hell of a town.
Have you been here?
Oh yeah, I have. Absolutely. I love it. I mean, there's different sites. There's things to do. I got some favorite haunts, but Denver, like, the city is a character in the city is a character in the novel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And I mean, I love Denver. I've been in Denver. I've been a Denver resident for almost 26 years now. I moved here in 2000. And I've been a Coloradan for a little bit longer than that. I lived in Boulder first. And yeah, it's just a city that once I moved here, I was like, I'm home, and I don't see myself anywhere else. And I've raised my family here, and we're not planning to go anywhere else anytime soon. So, but it's become a big part of my writing. My first novel, The Bookseller, was also set in Denver, set in the 1960s, early 1960s. And then
very
I'm also
different town compared to even the
very
90s.
different town.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really fun to research too. I mean, I had a great time researching that one. The Bookseller is the story of a woman who's caught between a dream life and a real life. So again, we kind of have some of those what if questions, very much so in that book of what would send you down a different path. And doing the research on that in Denver in the 60s was a lot of fun. And then I'm also the editor of an anthology, Denver Noir, which is a collection of short stories by 14 Denver and Colorado authors, 13 plus me. And it's part of a series of noir books from Akashic Books, a small publisher in Brooklyn. That's so great. That also was another wonderful, fun Denver related project.
Yes. There's a Willie Nelson song that's 14 seconds long about Denver that I love so much. So the Bookseller, you mentioned the Bookseller, The Glass Forest. I mean, this new novel, there's a familiarity to it for your readers, I would suggest. But it's also a different kind of expansiveness to it. How are you finding your evolution as a writer across these books?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, when I wrote The Bookseller, it was my first published novel, but not the first one that I wrote. I had a couple of practice novels before that. But you're in a different
term, by the way. That's a great term.
The practice novel. Yes. They were definitely practice. They're in a drawer and will never come out again.
I understand.
And it's not a bad thing to do them, honestly. But yeah, The Bookseller, I mean, I think when I wrote that book, I had the luxury of not being published yet. So there were no expectations. I didn't have expectations on myself, and I didn't have readers who had expectations, or publisher or anybody. So I could kind of write it on my own timeline and what I wanted to write. And that book did very well. It got a lot of publicity. It got a lot of press. It was, it's been published in 18 countries, and it was a New York Times bestseller, and it's been optioned by Julia Roberts. And so it's kind of got all this big deal stuff. But it definitely set up an expectation, and which I had to meet with The Glass Forest, my second book, which came out 3 years after The Bookseller. And The Glass Forest is a very different kind of story. It's a little bit more complex. I shouldn't say little. It's actually probably the most complex plot-wise of my 3 novels. And so I think when I started working on Anyone But Her, I think the evolution was sort of it was a up and then a down again, because as far as how complex I wanted things to be, because there's certainly a lot of layers to Anyone But Her, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that readers could wrap their heads around what was going on in both timelines. So now, I mean, I think you can do that in The Glass Forest too, but there are 3 narrators in that book, so there's a little bit more to keep track of. 3 narrators and 2 timelines, so there's just it's a little bit trickier to keep track of everything that's going on. Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of, I think that's, but I don't know. I mean, I think I'm kind of thinking through this answer as we're talking. It changes by book, and it changes by the story and what the characters want the story to be. So the one I'm working on right now, I have a 4th novel that I'm working on, and it's also dual timeline, and it has several narrators, and I don't see that changing. So because I think for that story, it's similar to The Glass Forest in that that's what that story wants to be. Whereas for the Bookseller and Anyone But Her, that single narrator was really the way to go.
Mm-hmm. So having a conversation with your readers, where does the character want to go? Where do the characters take me as a writer? But in a project like the Indie Author Project, where it's going to be in a conversation that's really library centric, it's very, very plain about that. Have you found new readers? Have you found new partners in the librarians, new audiences through this project?
Oh, absolutely. The librarians, especially my local librarians here, have been so wonderful. We have really, Denver Public Library is a fantastic district for a big city. They do a wonderful, wonderful job. And I've become friends with many of the librarians in the district, and they, I do events for my books when they come out, and they've been just great. They've been really great. And then we have a lot of our suburban districts are really fantastic too. And I've developed some really great relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, you can go around the clock around, I mean, Denver itself is great, but you get your Boulders, you got your Longmonts, you got your Anythinks, you got your Arapahoes, you got your Jeffcos. I mean, even up the hill a little bit further, up to Gilpin County, great little library.
Absolutely. Yeah. And well, in Grand County, I actually just did an event in Grand County. We have a place up there, which is, where Winter Park is.
Everybody's going to yell at me for not shouting out their name. I got to say,
it's true. Yeah. Don't forget Douglas County. Douglas County here is one of my biggest supporters. Yeah. Lisa Casper is one of my dear friends. She's great. But yeah, so I've been able to do events at a lot of the library districts around town, and even, as you said, out a little bit further into the mountain towns. So it's really been great. That's really cool. I'm glad that the project has put you in touch with some humans that I've spent a lot of time with over the years. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. You know those humans. They're all good humans. Well, as the National Political Action Committee for Libraries here at EveryLibrary, we get around. We've done a bunch of ballot measures for libraries there to try and the taxpayer bill of rights in Colorado. It's got some charms to it, but also it's a little fraught for these public institutions that need to keep up with the cost of living. That's right. Yeah. So let me get back to the Indie Author Project a little bit, and then really the question is, so I got to check one thing on here. November 13 to 14, 2026 is the 10th annual Indie Author Day. I want to make sure that it was coming out of my mouth correctly, because they do such great work. And the support or encouragement that you would have potentially to a colleague who wants to be a part of something like that. Yeah, I mean, I first of all, definitely entered the contest, and I think the contest deadline is May 31st. So now is the time to be thinking about that if you've published a book. And I'm not sure what the criteria is around when the book has to have been published. It's all on the website. Yeah, it's all on their website. Yeah, which we're seeing right there. So yeah, just look at the criteria. But I highly encourage everybody to go ahead and enter the contest. You've got nothing to lose, and come to the Indie Author Day event. It's an online event, and they have wonderful Zoom sessions and on all kinds of different topics around indie publishing. And then, as far as just in general, in my advice to people is to, what I always say is, just because you're independently published does not mean that you're putting out a low quality product. And that is one of the decisions that I made when I decided to indie pub Anyone But Her, is that I wanted the book to be as high quality in both content and appearance as my traditionally published Big Five books. And so, and the reason I say that is because I do not take for granted the enormous gift that readers give authors, and that's their time. I mean, whether you get the book at the library, or you buy it at a store, whatever, but the main thing that they're giving you is time. If you think about how long it takes most of us to read a book, you don't get that time back. It never comes back, which means that if somebody is choosing to read your book as an author, they're doing you it's a huge honor. And so I think that as indie authors, we owe it to our audience to give them the highest quality that we possibly can. And we owe it to ourselves too. So I always tell people, don't cut corners, work with a team, work with a team to make sure it's a quality product that you're putting out. Trust that you know what you're doing, and trust in the process, but also make sure that you're taking care of all the pieces to make the book the best it can possibly be.
That's a lovely sentiment, though, about the reader having a gift to the writer. And we tend to think about it. I tend to have conversations with authors, not that doesn't have that back and forth in it, but I haven't heard anybody put it that way before, And there is a bit of the whole, like, oh, you're an author, let me put you up here. And
Right.
yet, oh, you're my reader,
Right.
What a joy.
Well, I think about that for my own self. I mean, I'm like a notoriously slow reader, which
Okay.
is a really terrible trait to have as an author. But it takes me a while to get through a book. And a lot of times it's because I'm very carefully studying the craft, but also I like to really, get deep into it and absorb the book. And so as again, I said, that's time I'm not getting back. That's time I'm choosing to spend with this author's work. And knowing that there are people out there who are making that choice to do that with my books is something that I never take for granted.
That's really fantastic. Let me close with a little bit of a question about your Substack, which is called the What If Journal. And there's a creative philosophy conversation that you're trying to have out there on the What If Journal. So the what ifs that you're exploring right now, what's next, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tough time for all of us because there are so many what ifs, just given the environment that we're living in, the climate that we're living in this country and in the world. And so there's so much uncertainty that I think I'm trying to explore the questions around the creativity that relates that. I mean, where can we find places to make our work relevant in the world that we're living in right now? So that's sort of my big what if, is like, what if I found ways to make it relevant? My work is historical for the most part, and will probably continue to be that way. As I mentioned, I'm writing a book right now that's set in the 1930s. And honestly, there's a lot of ways to pull in some thoughts about the 1930s into the world we're in right now. So that brings in a lot of those what ifs. So I think that's a lot of it for me. It's just kind of thinking about how we can learn from history and how we can also bring that into our times right now and make them relevant and also make it entertaining for readers.
I think that's definitely worth a read. Cynthia Swanson, thank you so much. I want to put up on the screen again about the Indie Author Project to remind people that the next Indie Author Day is November 13, 14, 2026, that the submission period's open for people who want to write it. They've got a story to tell. The people who want to read it can get it 24/7, 365 at their local library. So what a treat. What a nice conversation today. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much, Sean. This has been really fun.
I'm so glad. Folks, if you would like to share this recording, because it's going to become a recording right away after this thing wraps up, on demand anytime, facebook.com/EveryLibrary, YouTube's, we're on YouTube with EveryLibrary as well. We've got a lot of author conversations going back a couple of years. People who think through the craft, I think with as much elegance as Cynthia does. It's one of the real treats that I have to be able to talk to people who are craftspeople for the written word. So, Cynthia, have a good day of it all. We'll see you soon, okay?
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
It's a real pleasure.